And as a result of that, which is this thing been building up for a long time, but as a result of the George Floyd thing, they are now working overtime to erase America history, right? Removing Confederate statues, pretending that they think that the American flag is racist. Yesterday they took down Robert E. Lee, and it really broke my heart to see that. And then they are replacing it with junk like statues of a thug like George Floyd and others. And yet, white Americans are quiet about that. I've been saying for 31 years, and I've written about it on Word at Daily and other places in my books, that white people need to start speaking up, because when they allow these people to erase the history of America, and the next generation won't know how great this country was and the people who helped to make it that way. White people who founded and discovered the greatest country on this side of heaven, and they made it so we can all be free. That's all being erased. It reminded me of the Taliban when they went over to Iraq and took over there, and they erased all the history of Christianity and stuff like that. That is happening here. What would it take for Americans, for white men to stand up and say no more?
Well, they have to learn that that's their heritage, that that's their history. I mean, they have to see Robert E. Lee as one of their ancestors. And it's unfortunate that a lot of white Southerners, especially among the middle class and more affluent, are embarrassed by Robert E. Lee, even though Robert E. Lee is one of the greatest Americans of all time.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at his personal character, it was unimpeachable. I mean, this man was always held himself with honor. He always treated himself with dignity. He treated the other people the way a good Christian gentleman would. And he was a terrific battlefield commander, even though they all want to say he's a loser. He didn't win the war. It's like Napoleon didn't win his war. Pompey didn't win against Caesar. Hannibal didn't win against the Romans, but we all see these men as great generals. And the same can be said of Robert E. Lee. And Robert E. Lee, he was at Eisenhower, Dwight D. Eisenhower, who helped win World War II, saw Robert E. Lee as one of the greatest generals America had ever produced, and greatest figures America has ever produced. And even people were like, well, he's a traitor. He did this. And Dwight D. Eisenhower, who everyone would agree is an American hero, thought that Robert E. Lee was one of the greatest figures in American history. So they have to, going back to your point about how do we make people defend our heritage, is that it's through proper education. It's through learning the truth about our history and defeating white guilt and the shame over our nation's history. That's how you get people to really see the truth and really come to light and actually start defending this stuff. And I think that the state is also, wanting to punish people who may protest against the taking down of the statues. You could be Black Lives Matter and, throw a Molotov cocktail at a statue or tear it down. I mean, you have to remember is that all on Monument Row in Richmond, leading up to Lee, there was all these great Southern Confederate generals, and they were raised by Black Lives Matter protesters last summer. They couldn't get Lee down because it's a little too heavy for them, but they were able to pull them down in a way that looked like the French Revolution, or as you said, the Taliban. And they could get away with it. But if you were just somebody who painted over it or said like, White Lives Matter or something like don't tear down Lee, the police would investigate you. There was a few cases last summer where people did that type of messaging and police would go out and look for them. Well, of course, like the guy like having a rope and tying it down and pulling down the statue, the police would just sit there and not do anything.
Yeah. And
so also it's people worry about the punishment for it. But I think once enough Americans realize that they're not going to stop at the Confederates. They're going to go after George Washington. They're going to go after Thomas Jefferson. Yeah. They may even go after Abraham Lincoln. I mean, Boston tore down an Abraham Lincoln statue because they thought it was politically incorrect because there's a slave thanking him for his freedom to Abraham Lincoln, which is historically accurate. I mean, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, and apparently we don't want to learn that anymore.
I believe I heard on the HakeReport.com. I don't know if it's a show that's on this network, and it comes on right after my show, the HakeReport.com. And he mentioned that Robert E. Lee had slaves, but because they were inheriting it, giving it over to him, but he was never in favor of slavery. It's just that something he had, but that's been left out when talked about Robert E. Lee. White people don't know that black people are not suffering because of this phony idea of racism. That's a made up word. Our battle is a spiritual battle between right and wrong, good and evil. And white people used to know that, along with other black people in those days. Have white people forgotten that blacks are not suffering because of slavery, but they're like a moral character, they're like of families, they're not been raised properly by fathers and mothers. It has everything to do with that and nothing to do with the history of America. White people don't remember that.
Well, it's politically incorrect to say that. They're worried that they'll be called racist if they.
But why do they care about that?
Yeah, that's why. I mean, for unfortunate is that a lot of whites are just too hesitant. They're not like us, Jesse. They are worried about saying the truth. And there's so many consequences from that. If they just point that out, that, you know, they could lose their job, you know, they could have their house like protested by Antifa. Like, there are all these consequences that they have to worry about. Now, we need people to just say that, to just say, hey, this is not due to slavery. This is not due to Jim Crow. This is not due to redlining. This is due to people's own actions and own behavior, that this is why it's happening. And to continue to blame these systemic problems, these like phantom problems, you know, it's like imagining that nothing's their fault, like they have no agency. You know, if there was any issue, if whites were like committing the same level of crime and having this, you know, the same level of problems in our community, nobody would say, oh, this is due to indentured servitude 300 years ago. They wouldn't say that. They would say, no, it's their own fault. It's their own behavior. It's their own actions. And it's about, to have a democracy, we have to think that people have the type of agency to control their behavior and to be in control of their own destinies. But here we're saying, oh, they're not. They're just, you know, they imagine them as almost like children. Is like, oh, they're just not responsible for this. This is all due to the evil white slave master who died, you know, 200 years ago. This is why that they're acting this way. And, you know, it's getting stronger. You know, I remember growing up, I would hear plenty of mainstream figures say, no, this is due to their own behavior. This is due to their culture, their character. You know, that's the reason why they're acting this way. But now even conservatives are starting to talk about systemic racism. Now, this is a real issue. You know, I've seen people like Ross Douthat, who writes at the New York Times, one of the biggest conservative columnists in America, who's saying that conservatives need to accept systemic racism. David French is saying that even elementary school kids and high school students need to learn about systemic racism. And these people are supposed to be conservative. And that's like a real change. And I think it's just this propaganda that people are learning, you know, the media brainwashing that's happening to them, that they feel that it's racist to, you know, notice the elephant in the room and being like, you know, maybe this isn't all due to slavery. So then they just buy into it, and they want the respect from liberals to say, well, I agree with you that it's, you know, systemic racism is real, but it's going too far to say that all white people should kill themselves. You know, I'm trying to be a centrist here, but, you know, it's not working. They should just say this is all BS. Like, we want to speak the truth. Yeah,
because if they are not speaking up because they're afraid of losing something like jobs or their homes and things like that, they're going to lose it anyway, because when the people know that they're weak to a point that they won't speak up for fear of losing something, they're going to go after their stuff anyway. And if you doubt me, look at the whites in South Africa. They didn't speak up, and now the blacks have taken over there. They're taking the land without compensation. They're taking the lives of white people, even in their own homes. They're raping and robbing. And that's what is happening slowly but surely in America. And so I would warn them that they should speak up anyway, because they're going to lose it by not speaking up. It's not going to get better, it get worse. There's Christopher Columbus Day coming up. And so the enemies of America want to call it Indigenous Day or something dumb like that.
Indigenous Peoples Day.
Yeah. And the problem is you're going to hear normal white people calling it Indigenous Day too, rather than calling it what it is. They're going to give in to the enemies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the funniest examples of this is the Boston Marathon rescheduled to Christopher Columbus Day, But in all the news articles coming out, because Boston doesn't acknowledge it as Christopher Columbus Day anymore, even though it has a significant Italian-American population, they call it Indigenous Peoples Day. And they had to apologize to the Indigenous people for having an event on their day. And they're like, this is just so insulting to American Indians that you would dare have a marathon on our day. Nothing else can happen on that day except for, I guess, feeling really bad about what we did to the American Indians, the supposed indigenous people. And even the concept of indigenous people is ridiculous because like these people came, the American Indians came across the Bering Strait. They came from Asia. And there's reports, there's a lot of evidence showing that there was people here and the American Indians wiped them out. And now we're supposed to think that they just sprouted from the ground. They've always been here. And we just came over and stole their land without, this is the worst thing in the world, which they forget all of human history about how people have moved around. There's been conflicts. A lot of it's been nasty stuff, but this is how we're here today. And they themselves practice this not only against the inhabitants that they found, but also against each other. I mean, they had such horrible barbaric practices of just torturing war captives to death. There was even some tribes in South America who would practice cannibalism. Even in America, even among North American Indians, there was this type of ritual cannibalism. And even in the crimes that they committed against the European settlers, they really did try to ethnically cleanse them. But due to, superior technology and other things, the European settlers were able to defeat them. So, but we're all supposed to feel bad that these peace-loving people who are just sitting around, passing around the peace pipe, they had been sprouted from the ground in America. They've always been here, that somehow the evil white man invented the idea of war and they were, destroyed. And this is all due to Christopher Columbus, and another man that we should celebrate as one of the greatest figures in human history. Without Christopher Columbus, there's so much history that wouldn't have happened. And he was a person that set out, didn't know what he was going to find, crossed a dangerous sea, and he led to European settlement of this continent, and that's why we celebrate him. And Italian Americans see him as their hero, but they don't want to even give Italian Americans that. Apparently Italian Americans can only have Mario from Super Mario, I guess. That could be the only figure that they can celebrate. I guess Mario had no racism, so I guess he's okay.
Are Italian Americans considered to be white to these people?
Yeah, I mean, they are, of course, considered white. They're from Europe. I mean, everyone from Europe is considered white.
I got it. They have rewritten history because now when they talk about slavery, they make it sound awful. It's just awful. And then the Jim Crow law. I grew up under the Jim Crow law, and at the time, the blacks knew that it was the Democratic Party that didn't want the blacks in the Democratic Party. That's what the Jim Crow law was all about. The Democratic Party did not want the blacks to be a part of it. And that's why they started the Republican Party, because the blacks were not welcome into the Democratic Party. But now when they talk about the Jim Crow law, they pretend that it's the white Republicans who did it, right? And that the blacks were not welcome in the Republican Party. And it wasn't true, because when I was growing up, all the blacks that I knew were Republicans and not Democrats. Even that guy, Martin Luther King Jr., was a Republican. He was not a Democrat. But they have managed to switch the conversation to make it look like it was the white Republican Party, and it just was not true.
Yeah, I mean, there's many aspects of history they don't want to leave. They want to leave out and lie about and not know. And and it's this. They have this whole notion. I mean, one of the things about having the left having complete cultural power is that they're able to shape history and they're able to shape the narratives that are taught to the vast majority of Americans. And they don't learn a lot of important facts about our history.
Right.
And you can look at many things, not just from plenty of African Americans were supporting, blacks were supporting the Republican Party, and then that switch. And they also overlook they also try to even excuse the riots that happened, after the Civil Rights Movement or, after the Civil Rights Act. And they try to even say that America was trying to give them, trying to work and try to say look, we're ending the things that you don't like. We're trying to bring you fully into the society. And then there's still, you know, the rioting and there's like crime is going up. And then, you know, to white liberals, this is just a sign of American racism. You know, that even these riots and crime that was going up in all these cities, some as a result of like what had, you know, the legislation and laws that had been changed during the civil rights era, they don't want to acknowledge that at all. They all want to see that this is once again, like whites just like, oh, we lost Jim Crow. Now we're going to leave the cities, and the cities are magically going to turn into, you know, not nice, very nice places. They don't look at what like caused like white people to leave these cities. They don't look at what like the quality of life that declined in these cities. So they don't, I mean, there's so much a part of the history from post-World War II that's not taught accurately to school children and even to adults. And this leads to people having silly notions about Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and other things. So how people learn history and how people view the past and how people view the nation impacts how they view the world today. It's not just simply a, you know, things you learn for trivia night. It is how you look at the world and how you shape your politics and how you view the past.